Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Write Great Dialogues for Alexa Skills. My name is Justin Jeffress, and I'm a Senior Solutions Architect at Amazon. And I travel the world teaching people how to build Alexa skills and design for voice. And I'm very excited to share a stage today with the one and only Allison Atwell.
Hi, I'm Allison. I work on Alexa Skills Kit as a designer. I'm an Amazon resource for developers who Amazon wants to work with. These might be Fortune 500 companies. They might be getting some marketing, really high-profile marketing, or they might just be trying something new for the first time that we've never done before. And my job is to help them make a great skill, either for the first time or for the 100th time. You might recognize some of these skills, like Jeopardy, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Westworld, Skyrim Extra Special Edition, and even NORAD Santa Tracker. These are, again, skills we really wanted to push the boundaries of what a skill can do, and so Amazon sent me in.
Cool. All right. So in order to write great dialogues, you need to start with the right foundation. And conversations, they ebb and flow, and the responses depend on the previous answer to a question. So it might be very tempting to use a flowchart to do that, but you should avoid that. And we're going to go throughout some steps today that prove that you shouldn't do that. And you'll see why on the next slide very shortly. And also Paul and Anna today spoke about situational design, and so we're going to be tapping into that and further hitting on some points as to why you'd want to use situational design to help you create better dialogues. And so situational design, just to recap, is a voice-first method to design a voice user interface. So you should start with a simple dialogue, which helps you focus on the conversation, and that's how customers interact with your skill. So let's take a look at what is not situational design or conversational design. So
this is not situational design. This is a flow chart, and it's a pretty bad flow chart. I can say that because I made it. The best skills, especially the ones that we work on in ASK with developers, they're dynamic. They adjust to what they learn about the customer. They leverage all kinds of Amazon technologies and device types to create a really dynamic experience. But that can make voice UI flowcharts like this really complicated. And in fact, there are some skills that we make, you can't even build a flowchart. There's not enough space for all the lines here. Relying on nodes and lines like this comes with a few problems that we're going to discover really quickly in a second. And in fact, we've really set ourselves up for an awkward conversation here. This is a very simple trivia skill that I made as a sample for developers. And in documenting this, I actually found this flowchart, even for a really simple trivia skill, was really insufficient. So let's explore one of the ways that that's really insufficient. Don't try this at home. We'll just talk through this for a second. So Justin is going to play the part of Alexa, funnily enough, even though his voice kind of sounds like the Matthew Polly voice, which I think is really cool. And I will play the part of our imperiled user. So Alexa, ask Seattle Super Trivia for my lifetime score.
welcome to Seattle Super Trivia. You can start playing, learn how to get more trivia, or learn about your scores.
I want my lifetime score.
OK. I can tell you your score yesterday, your highest score, or your lifetime score. Which would you like?
My lifetime score, please.
Your lifetime score is 36 out of 45. Want to hear more about your scores?
Sure.
OK. I can tell you your score yesterday, your highest score, or your lifetime score. Which would you like?
Oh, forget it.
I'm not sure about that. I can tell you your score yesterday, your highest score.
Alexa, stop.
So yes, that was bad.
That was pretty bad. What happened exactly?
So when we used our flowchart, we didn't draw all the lines. So we weren't able to figure out and accurately predict how the different ways that the user might interact with our skill.
Yep, we had a menu, and I was forced through it, even though I said the first time exactly what I wanted. It didn't map to exactly what I wanted, even though buried deep down in your menu was exactly what I wanted, you still forced me through it because we just didn't draw that line.
Right. And we also forgot the context of the conversation, right?
Yep.
Like, context can help you skip through unnecessary questions because you already have that basis of what it is that you're supposed to be doing at that moment. So with our flowchart, we ended up creating a very rote, specific experience that you can't deviate from. So that's why you don't want to use flowcharts, because they actually handicap the experience.
So let's take a look at an alternative way of building this skill.
All right. So for that, we'll use situational design, and we'll build together storyboards. And those storyboards represent the actual flow of your conversation. And so a storyboard is composed of cards, and each one of those cards represents a single turn of an interaction. And that turn is the call and response. So the user says something, that's the call, and Alexa responds, that's the response. So one card represents both of those pieces, what the user says and what Alexa responds with. So let's take a look at one of these cards. So you can see here, this is one of the cards that Allison created for the Seattle Super Trivia. And you'll see here at the top we have the utterance. This is what the user said. So this is that call. And then we have in gray there, the situation. So this is the context. Remember, this is what we forgot in our state machine, or no, sorry, our flow chart. And then in purple, we have a nice little addition here for different sound effects, right? Because we're playing a game. Yep. And then we have at the bottom the response. And we can split that response into two parts. Because again, what we say to the user might be different based upon the context. And the prompt that we ask him can also differ based upon the context. So this allows us to be able to represent how things are going to be changing without having to write down all the separate conversations and different ways that it could deviate. And then we can stick these all together and build a representation of the conversation.
Yep. So here you're looking at a happy path essentially through the skill, which is where we should start designing all skills, is going through the happy path, what happens when things go according to plan.
Cool.
This is going to represent one end-to-end interaction. And it's going to demonstrate just the core functions. So for example, we've got our welcome message, we've got our instructions, we have our questions, and then we have wrapping up the game. And because I'm really bad at trivia, my happy path also includes a little unhappy path where I get a question wrong. And you can see here in these columns, we can start to build out all of the possible alternate or unhappy paths. They might still be happy paths every once in a while. But you can see where we can start to build this out. And while we talk about some other best practices here, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. We're going to be building out this storyboard to be complete and be better than a flowchart.
Right, and that's one of the great things about using these storyboards to represent the conversation is that you can easily identify, like, oh, we're missing the part where they do have an incorrect answer, so now we need to create a new turn or a new card, right? So we have the incorrect answer, and then we can specify Alexa's response. We know what the situation is, and so we can handle those things more gracefully than we ever would be able to do with a flowchart.
Yep. Or if I ask for my lifetime score and I'd really just like my lifetime score, please, we can create a card for that and we don't have to draw a ton of lines.
Right, right. Cool. So now that we have a basic understanding of situational design and we know what not to do, which is use flowcharts, don't do that, Allison and I will cover some of the best practices that you can immediately put to use to improve your skills dialogues. All right, so let's go through our best practices.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. So yes, there are some things that you'll want to think about, and one of those is to be adaptable. And so you want to think to yourself, like, how long have they used your skill? Is this their first time? Is this the second time that they've used the skill? And how long have they been away from your skill? Has it been 5 seconds, 5 days, 5 months? If it's been 5 seconds since the last time that they used your skill, then you probably don't need to basically hit them over the head with the onboarding for your skill again. They've probably in the middle of something. Maybe they're playing a game and they had to walk away. But
answer the door.
Right.
Shut the dog up.
But if it's been 5 months, maybe in that case, instead of going through and treating them like they've never used the skill before, maybe it's time to let them know that there's been a new feature that you added, or just give them a little bit more contextual information.
So here are a few storyboards I created for that. Of course, the first one, we have our first time welcome message. I'm gonna say a little bit more about the skill and I'm gonna intro the skill. But if you can imagine, this is a daily use skill. You get 5 questions a day. I don't wanna hear this every single day. I might be less likely to come back if you made me listen to this every single day. As well as the instructions, once I listen to them once, I don't need to hear that again. But if I come back in 5 seconds, maybe I don't need to ask the customer if they wanted to start the game again. I was just playing 5 seconds ago. Just get back to the game. I had to answer the door. I'm good now. Let's move it along. If it was 5 days ago, maybe I should give a little bit more of an introduction. And then, of course, if it's been months and months and months, maybe I run them back through the introduction again and give them the instructions again. Maybe this is, I want to reward a customer for playing 5 days in a row, or you've been here for 5 months, and so I'm going to add a little color and say, you know, you've been throwing fish with the best of them. Let's try something a little bit harder. And so I can really delight our players with some of those messages. If I wanted to do that in a flowchart, I would be drawing nodes and lines all day, and a developer would take a look at it and say, what on earth is going on here?
Right. And part of interacting with a human conversational partner is having that adaptability, right? Like over the time you get to know somebody, you get to know more and more about them, and then every time you meet them, you don't have to say, start over from your reintroduce yourself. It's like, hi, Allison.
When I saw you today, I was like, hi, I'm Allison.
Hi,
nice
to meet you. Right.
We've been working on this for a while now. I could say, hey, did you upload the latest slides? We can just cut to the chase in our conversation.
Right. We don't have to say, did you upload the latest slides for the thing that we're, like, we didn't have to go through and reintroduce the context every single time. We have a shared context that grows over time. Yes. Cool. So another thing is to be brief. One of the things that you have to think about when you're building an Alexa experience is that it's a voice for first experience. And so you don't have a screen to rely upon. If you have a screen, you don't have to be as explicit as to what you need the user to do or what information they need to give you, because they can look at it and scan through it with their eyes and see, okay, here's the information I need to provide. Whereas with voice, everything that you need from the user, you have to convey and speak, and that takes time. They have to listen, they have to process, and then they have to come back with the response. And so, you need to make sure that you're writing things to be heard, not read, because a lot of times we can skim things with our eyes.
Make your grammar teacher from high school really angry and put commas everywhere.
Yes.
You're not writing a thesis paper or anything like that. You're writing for somebody to listen to.
Right, and to Allison's point, like Alexa does respect the grammatical like punctuation marks with pauses. So if you put a comma, she'll naturally pause. And so that's why she says break those grammar rules, because Alexa will put those pauses. And in conversation, we don't just speak nonstop without taking a breath. We pause and we take a breath. And so putting those commas into the text will help your skill put those pauses in place so the user can then digest the information more clearly. Cool. Another thing is, you don't want to state the obvious. And we'll show you a good example of that in our don't do slide. You want to think about how you can say more with less, and then let users learn by doing, not by telling them. So let's take a look at a bad example compared to a good example. So here we have our do and our don't.
Yeah, as you can see on the left here, we have a giant wall o text. This is somebody who really tried to explain absolutely everything. Writing to be read, not necessarily heard. And in fact, if you listen to this, it takes about 30 seconds to get through it, which actually in voice time is quite a long time for somebody to listen. Right. And by the way, we haven't started playing the game yet. I'm still yammering on about the instructions here. So we want to be a little bit quick about it. So let's kind of dive into what's going on here. Again, wall o text. Some of these instructions are going to be better experience than just kind of me telling you about it. What if something just happened and you learned by doing? If that's at all possible, definitely do that. Teach somebody by running them through it. So we also, again, stating the obvious, welcome to your first round of Seattle Super Trivia. I'm pretty sure the customer will know that they've never been here before. And then I explain a lot of instructions, and it might be okay to say, I've got 5 fresh trivia questions every day because I want you to come back every day, but I'm pretty sure your average customer or player will be able to navigate their way through multiple choice and true-false questions. I don't think we'll be throwing any curveballs at them by doing that. Maybe we can delete that part of the sentence.
I don't know, I might not be able to figure out what the difference between true or false is.
Maybe we need to make another skill for you then. Maybe this is the wrong skill. Again, they're gonna learn that if they're gonna learn how scoring works by receiving their score for the first time. And I've already asked to play. I've already said, yes, I'm ready to play, so I don't need to ask them again, are you ready to play? I think by the end of this, the person might have fallen asleep, and I might want to ask them if they're ready to play. But if I shorten this and remove all of the stuff that really wasn't necessary, we're going to find that this is a lot simpler, and we actually cut this prompt in half. So I might make a little joke about them being a new person. You know, put that umbrella down, noob. You know, we don't do that in Seattle. Umbrellas. So maybe I want to tell them, you know, still each day you'll have 5 new questions because I want you to come back. I also want you to realize that getting the answer correct is kind of important because you might get bonus questions. You might get to keep playing. That's probably worth keeping. And you know, you can play as long as you get the answers. And I'm only going to give you 1 hint every round, so that's probably pretty important to state rather than letting you waste your hint and then telling you, sorry, you used your hint already. So we want to reduce the surprises, but also leave all of these things learnable. Right.
Okay. Great, and so, you know, another thing that you want to think about as a best practice is, you know, how you handle confirmations. And so there's 2 different types. There's implicit versus explicit. And so an implicit confirmation would be something like, you know, where you, in the prompt, repeat what it was that you captured from the user. So if they were to say something like, I want to book a flight on January 21st, you could say, oh, you want to book a flight on January 21st, right? So
I have these options
right.
Instead of, that was on January 21st, correct?
Right. So you can see the difference. What Allison just did was the explicit versus implicit, and the last one was explicit. And it's like, oh, well, now I have to say yes before we can move on to the next. With the implicit, she repeats back to me what she heard and asks me the next question. So that way, it gives me the opportunity to go, oh, wait, actually, you know what? No, let's do January 22nd, or let's do July 31st. Like, you know, it gives me a chance to hear back what she interpreted and correct her if I need to, but then, or change my option, or, you know, continue on in the discussion. So
I always consider the consequences of making an error, whether I use an implicit versus explicit confirmation. If I say transfer $400 to Justin, I would like some kind of I would like to hear one more time, that's $400 to Justin, and if I hear that's $4,000 to Justin, I would like
auto accept.
I would like to be able to say no.
Auto accept.
No. And I'm going to be really uncomfortable with a skill that doesn't do that. The consequences for an error here are quite high on my bank account.
But not on mine.
Right. Whereas whether you want to start the game, I'm not going to have many hard feelings toward you if you start the game when I didn't mean for you to versus transferring $4,000 instead of $400. So consider your consequences there, whether you do an explicit or an implicit confirmation. And you'll notice in our last example, I removed that extra confirmation. Not only did I just tell you that I just asked you whether you wanted to start the game, but I also said, I went ahead and said, let's start the game. There's nothing else you can do but play the game here, so I'm not going to ask you if you want to start the game. If you say no, I'm not going to know what to do with that.
Right.
You came here to play a game, let's play the game.
Right, and the user at that point had already said, let's play. And so you're starting, you're starting the preamble before explaining to them the rules. You don't need to ask them at that point, do you want to play? It's like, well, yes, I already said that in the previous turn.
Let's play.
Yes. So the other thing you want to do is you want to avoid voice menus. So, you know, it's it's pretty bad, like having this huge menu. When we have a conversation, I don't say, "Hey, Allison, today, would you like to talk to me about, Alexa Live? Do you want to talk to me about going for lunch?" No, like I don't give you a set of options. We just talk.
Yep. Yeah. Who else avoids calling like their bank or something, any kind of phone menu system at all costs? I traveled out of the country just recently and had to set up a travel notice on my bank account, and I swear it was 9 menus deep before I reached this function. And this is after clicking around the website for over an hour trying to avoid this very task, doing it on the phone. So nobody likes voice menus. In fact, what if we put a voice menu in here? What's going to happen?
Right.
We're going to zoom into this example in a couple of slides, but as you can see, we have a voice menu here. It's tedious to read. I'm not going to read it.
Right, and then the other thing is like, what do I have to say, right? Because prefaced by each one of these options here, there's a number. So do I say 1, or do I have to say, here, your lifetime score? Do I really have to talk about myself in third person, or do I say my lifetime score? Like, what am I supposed to do?
And we also don't need to put global controls in menus. I don't say to you, we can talk about my vacation, Alexa Live, or say stop to ignore me and be on your merry way. That's really not natural either. And
Right.
people who use Alexa, stop is one of those global commands. We don't need to remind them how to use it.
Right. Cool. Okay. So yes, when speaking to lists, you want to make sure that if you do give them a set of options, like make it more definitive as to what those options are. And you also want to keep those options limited. So, if you give them a list of like 15 options to choose from, the user's probably going to tune out after the first 2, maybe 3, and they'll probably only remember the first one, second one, and the last one that you give them.
Yep.
So,
and if we're speaking to a child, it gets even more difficult. We have a ton of kid skills, and it's usually best to just say, do you want to do this, yes or no, or we can do this, or we can do that. If we keep listing out options, they almost always just remember the last thing that you say and parrot it back, and that's not a very good experience.
No. And you also want to make sure that you accept a lot of different synonyms and ways to say similar things. Because it's very frustrating if you force the user to say a phrase a specific way. You want to make sure that you give a lot of different synonyms so that way they can, say something a little bit differently than the way that you asked, but the skill can then interpret and understand it. And
by the way, we should always ask, we should always open the mic with some kind of prompt, because sometimes I'm not sure when Alexa's done speaking. And often when I'm listening for a very long time, I just miss my cue that you were actually asking me a question, as tends to happen to me in real life sometimes. So this is our user's best cue that they have, that we expect, we're waiting for your input.
And one other thing to do about lists is you want to make sure that you add like a distinct pause in between each one of the options that you're asking. Because if you do not put a pause, it might run together, and your user might not realize that there were actually 3 options. They might hear it as 2 because it was all strung together too rigidly.
Yep.
So
we've gone down this rabbit hole where we actually need to create some errors now, regardless of whether we're using this awful voice menu or not. We're gonna have to try to recover errors. And the first thing that I wanna do that I did to this person, this poor soul using this skill, is I actually did a little bit of bait and switch on them. If you'll notice, I asked them if one of my options was, learn how to get more trivia, which is actually an upsell to buy more trivia, but this particular person doesn't have purchasing permissions turned on. Well, why did I even offer that to begin with? That's pretty annoying. The next thing that I did was I didn't really respect their history, and so I asked them if they'd like to hear their lifetime score. Well, my lifetime technically is 1 game, and I just heard the score for that game. So I don't need to offer that either. So there are a couple of things that I've done here. I can pretty much eliminate almost this entire menu. In fact, I'm about to. I'm not going to also, so replay today's game. That's, it was 5 questions. That might be kind of lame. And if I come back into the skill, I'm going to learn that anyway, that I can replay the game. So that's not necessary either. So here I'm starting to eliminate some of these menu options, and it actually boils down to, I don't give you a menu at all. There's actually nothing else that you can do here. We're done for the day. So I'm going to give you your score. This person is better at trivia than I am. They got a 4 out of 5. And I'm going to congratulate them, and then I'm going to ask them to come back tomorrow because it's a daily use skill, and then I'm done. I don't need to frustrate this person anymore. I've now improved my chances of them coming back and having a successful session again tomorrow.
So, I have a quick question. What are the little brackets in the text there, like wrapped around Holy Gum Wall and bye for now?
Right, so excellent question. I use this to fill in, to indicate to developers that I have some dynamic data in here. Either it's dynamic in that it's user input, so my score is 4 out of 5, it might be 5 out of 5, 1 out of 5. And then, Holy Gum Wall is only funny like once. So I'm gonna think of a whole bunch of different phrases to put in here that's indicating that this person did really well. And so the skill seems pretty dynamic. If I said Holy Gum Wall every single day, again, I'm gonna get tired of the skill and realize that it doesn't actually know anything about me. It's just saying the same thing over and over again. And then bye for now, it's really great to have dynamic greetings. So I'm not going to create a storyboard for every one of these possible responses because it's really the same storyboard and we're just filling in some dynamic data. So I'm not going to create 600-700 storyboards for these because I'm working on skills, by the way, that are going to be hundreds of storyboards without me filling out extra nonsense like this. So if I can indicate to a developer, this is dynamic data, go see a list that I've created elsewhere, they can fill that library, we're good.
Yeah, and you were telling me an interesting story about the NORAD skill. Do you want to go into some detail about that?
Yes, we're going to talk about GUI in a minute, but what we did with the NORAD Santa Tracker skill was these were dynamic screen responses, and instead of me documenting, I think it's something like 3,000 to 6,000 possible unique responses, instead of me creating every single one of those individually, what I did was actually create individual layers that we can mix and match to change responses. So I actually took a very small set of assets and created thousands of possible experiences that you could have with this skill, because we actually knew on Christmas Eve when children ask Alexa, where's Santa? They continue asking Alexa, where's Santa? And they continue asking Alexa, where's Santa to the chagrin of their parents. So we wanted to keep delighting them. We didn't want to give the same screen response over and over. So we also made our screen responses dynamic as well. And some of Alexa's dialogue is also dynamic in that. So if you factor in the dialogue and the GUI responses, I'm a designer. I'm bad at numbers, but that's many tens of thousands of possible responses at that point.
Cool. All right. Yeah. It's an awesome story. Cool. So yes, another thing that you want to think about is making sure that your error messages that you communicate to the user are contextual. If they just said something that caused an error, you don't want to confuse the user by saying something that's out of context, right? Like you want to make sure that you're taking them, and leading them to back to where they need to be. And so a part of what you can do is maybe that error or maybe that thing that they said isn't available at that time, but at that you can train them how to use your skill better. You can use what's called the fallback intent and capture some unexpected utterance and be like, oh, you're in the middle of playing a game, here are some things that you could say, right? So you're letting them know that what's going on, what they're currently doing. They're in the middle of a game. And you're going to give them some contextual information about what they can do next in that particular moment of the game.
You can also create really teachable moments with contextual errors. So if somebody is going to ask this game something, let's go ahead and look at a storyboard for that, where this person actually asked for, I'm going to ask for a hint. Well, the absolute worst thing I can do to this person is say, sorry, hint wasn't the answer I was looking for, and count it wrong. That's terrible. Nothing makes people angrier than counting an answer wrong when they shouldn't. If you go and read some skill store reviews, you'll find that out very quickly. So that's the worst we could do.
Right.
Better, but still pretty bad, is maybe delivering a generic error, not respecting their context at all, and saying, I'm not sure, and then repeat the question. Hint is, kind of a, give me a hint is a very easy thing to understand. I'm going to anticipate that people are going to ask a trivia skill for a hint.
Right.
And I'm going to give them one hint a day, and I'm going to use a contextual error to teach them and remind them that I give them one hint a day.
Right. And this is, where using situational design is much better than using a flowchart, because you can anticipate and think about, like, you start with your happy path, and then you start thinking about, like, how can I break this happy path? And one way to see how you can break the happy path is to get people to look at your happy path and read through it and try to break it, right? Before you even start building your skill or building a prototype, you can actually read the script and have someone, like, you can say, okay, now that we've created this, like, at each point where the user speaks, say something different than I don't expect. And so while doing that, you'll come across that people are going to ask for hints, especially if you've told them in the instructions, like, you can ask for a hint.
Or they'll ask to skip. So if they ask to skip, I don't want to let you skip a question in this specific trivia, but I'm not going to be a jerk about it. The best thing I could do is deliver a contextual error that says, sorry, you can't skip a question. And then I can actually check to see if they use their hint that day and be super helpful and say, do you want a hint instead? Do you want to use your hint? And if they haven't used the hint, I can say, you're really in a pickle now. You can't skip a question. You can't ask for a hint. Here's the question again. Let's
And
let's get an answer.
With the flowchart, there's no way how to really represent that. You just draw lines with lines, and then what ends up happening is you get all these duplications, and it's like creates this big, huge spider web of
and if you don't duplicate, you're drawing lines that go like this, and then a developer starts to lose their hair trying to figure out what you actually intended the skill to do. So speaking of errors. You'll notice I didn't apologize for that error just now. I didn't say I'm sorry. I just said you can't skip a question, and there's a reason for doing that. Yes.
So you really want to consider whose fault it is, right? Like, is it a shortcoming of the skill? Is it a problem with the Amazon service? Maybe it's nobody's fault. So you don't want to keep saying sorry over and over and over again unnecessarily.
When a player hears sorry in any skill context, they usually they tend to assign fault. And so if I say sorry, 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 they might actually keep saying the same thing over and over and over again because they think it's a problem with the skill and not a problem with it. It was actually their bad on that part. I didn't make them feel bad for it, but I didn't say sorry because I didn't want them to ask again. And with errors, the less you talk and the better, just rather than explain what happened, explain what to do about it. So I can't skip a question. Do you want a hint? That's very action-oriented and understandable. One little caveat was saying sorry, actually, if you use a skill in Japanese, which, fun fact, you speak Japanese.
Yes, I do.
And in Japan, the culture is a little bit more deferential, and so they actually say sorry a little bit more. So if you're designing for a different culture, respect that and be aware of that situation. That maybe in one culture it's more acceptable to and expected to apologize.
And in fact, in Japan, in Japanese, like when you're trying to get someone's attention, you'll often say sumimasen, which means sorry. Like if you're in a restaurant, as a customer, you'd say sumimasen, and then like that's like the waiters and waitresses will be like, oh, they have a question. I need to go help them, or I need to go take their order.
Right.
So it's a little bit different in that.
It's a very deferential way of asking.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. That's great. So GUI, this is fun.
Yes.
This is my favorite part, actually.
So yes, yes, Alexa is a voice first experience, and there's no guarantee that you're going to have a screen, but there are devices that have screens. And so you have to think about the differences between how you would speak to your users when you have a screen versus when you don't have a screen. And so you want to make sure that your screens enhance and complement the voice experience. If you have a screen, maybe you don't have to be as descriptive, but there is a fine line because maybe they're a certain distance away from the screen where they can't see it. Maybe they're in their kitchen and they're listening to your skill speak to you while their hands are busy, right?
Yep.
So you really have to put some thought into it, and don't rely on the GUI.
Yep. This is not an app. In so many ways. First of all, we're not creating a UI that we're forcing the person to navigate. We're being very paced and natural. The same way we're not going to do it on the screen. And so here are a few screens I made for this skill. And a few tips with these is all of your touch targets on the screen should have a voice analog so I can still speak what I want. I don't have to touch the screen again if I'm like washing dishes or something. I'm not gonna like my soapy hands like I want
exactly.
that.
If you got wet hands, you know, touch screens don't
Right,
usually react pretty well. So.
Right, but not every voice command you have needs a touch target. You don't have to fill your screen with buttons for like stop and all of that, hint. We can still keep it very natural. You don't have to fill the screen with every available option like you might on a website or an app. We want to use meaningful imagery. If this is going to help the person, maybe it reduces cognitive load to see, yes, I got that right. It's a celebration screen, or no, you got that wrong. That's a sad, rainy screen, especially with kid skills. Love that. And then again, we want to be faster. We want to make this easier in some way using the screen, and we want to be more fun.
Right. And one of the nice things about using situational design and creating these cards is we can easily add the screen that's supposed to be displayed at this turn of the interaction. Right. With our flowchart, there was really no way for us to be able to do that because we have these shapes, we've got these lines, it's not very conversational. Where do I put the representation of the screen? Like, it's just getting way more complicated. So.
Right. Speaking of voice-first design, voice quality has a lot to do with the design of a skill. And you might not see the difference, but you'll definitely hear it.
Yes.
What can we do to improve our voice quality? What are we talking about when we talk about that?
You know, we sort of alluded to this earlier, but you know, one is to like break your grammar rules by adding in punctuation marks to have Alexa pause. But there are other places where maybe you want the pause to be longer, because I don't know exactly how long she pauses when you put a comma in, but if you want to make, say, a pause go for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, there's something that you can use called SSML, which is Speech Synthesis Markup Language. And it's very similar to HTML, so if you're familiar with HTML, you should feel right at home. And you can use that to add a longer pause than if you have just a comma. You can also use SSML to add sound effects. So with our trivia game, you know how we have those little purple sections on the cards? Those represent some of the sound effects that we play. So you'll have some feedback that lets them know, like, oh, okay, they got it right, versus if they got it wrong. And then you can also like use different voices as well with SSML.
Yes, and we're going to talk about that in a second.
Yes.
So we're going to listen to, this is going to be an answer result, and we are going to hear plain TTS with minimal punctuation, no SSML, no sound effects, and it's going to explain to us the answer to a question: when did the first people arrive in Seattle? And our answer is C. And I think we get the answer right here. I can't remember.
Yeah,
again,
I think so.
Bad at trivia myself, and I wrote the question. So we're going to go ahead and listen to that plain TTS and see where we can improve it.
That is correct. According to archaeological finds, humans arrived around c. 10,000 years ago. Some of those Native American tribes referred to as the Coast Salish peoples are still active in Seattle today.
Okay.
That was a little off, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was very uncanny valley. Like, I'm talking to a person, but
Yeah.
something's not right. Maybe they've had a little too much caffeine and
Right. It's very
forgot to pause.
right.
Yeah.
I said it all in one breath with no like. Yeah.
Right. So here I've just done some very simple markup and one sound effect, and you're going to hear the difference right away.
You betcha. According to archaeological finds, humans arrived around c. 10,000 years ago. Some of those Native American tribes, referred to as the Coast Salish peoples, are still active in Seattle today.
great. Much better, right?
Yeah, way
It
better.
sounds more like you and I conversing a little bit more. It'll never
Right.
sound completely 100% human, because this is TTS we're talking about here, but we can get really creative
Right.
in where we put emphasis, where we put breaks,
And that's
and making things more clear.
And that's one thing, like once you hear like the second example where you're actually using the SSML, it makes you want to go through and like, because it makes all the other bad points sound even worse. So it makes you want to go back and fix and change all those things.
Yep, yep.
So.
Okay, and using different voices, let's talk about that. Speaking of voice quality, one really great way to improve how dynamic your skill sounds, and maybe you're doing some storytelling, maybe there are some different roles happening in the skill, maybe there's a scorekeeper who's like taunting you and being, like typical rude
Right.
Seattleite, like, you get lost on your way to Space Needle, come on, I need an answer here. Versus, maybe somebody who's going to give you a hint that's a little bit more polite.
Yes.
We can do that using different voices.
Right. We can give each voice a personality and stick to that personality. So that's really nice being able to do that. And you can easily add poly into your interactions, into your skills by using SSML. And what's really great about that, you do have an option to use pre-recorded audio, but if you use pre-recorded audio, you're stuck with what you've recorded. It's not dynamic. And so it could get really expensive and costly to create tons and tons and tons of recordings. But if you use poly, then you can dynamically change the voice and have the different prompts and things update dynamically.
Yep. And it can quickly become a lot more entertaining than just a trivia skill with Alexa kind of walking you through it. Again, like your voice sounds like the Matthew Polly voice, which is very, very dynamic and authoritative. So Matthew might actually be the one taunting me here. Whereas maybe I think her name, I forget her name, but she's this very nice British voice. So it might be nice to hear my hints from her instead of jerky Matthew over here.
Are you saying I'm jerky and authoritative?
You can be.
All right.
Again, when we're using multiple voices, one caveat there is we want to be consistent. So if Matthew is my jerky narrator / scorekeeper who's taunting me, he's not going to suddenly be like, "Congratulations, you did so well." Or if I say help and he presents a menu, that's going to be kind of weird. And maybe Alexa or one of the other voices should take care of that. We want to help the player through the game. We don't want to confuse them even more by putting in these multiple personalities that sound a little bit nutty if they're not all very consistent. My personality is a certain way no matter what, within maybe some margin of error of cups of coffee I've had that day. And I don't expect you to show up at my desk one day like actually being a jerk. You're not a jerk. So I wouldn't expect you to do that. So we'll be consistent.
Right. Cool.
So that was a lot. Let's kind of review.
Sure, yes. So, our best practices that we went through are, you want to make sure that you're adaptable. So that's why you want to make sure that you're using storyboards and situational design rather than flowcharts. You want to make sure that you're brief. You don't need to onboard the user every single time they interact with your skill. Be adaptable and be conversational. So that also relates to context. So you want to make sure that over time, as you get to know the user, you're not constantly inundating them with the same information. You want to be proactive in preventing errors. And with multimodal, you want to make sure that you are adapting your prompts to if you have a screen, and be dynamic by adding voice sound effects and using SSML to make things better.
Yeah, so again, we use these storyboards to create something really dynamic. Here's a little side-by-side before and after. On the left, here's our madness, which, by the way, is incomplete still. Over on the right here, I've actually built out a full experience, and it also includes some upsells and monetization and all kinds of navigation for new kinds of trivia. On the left here, I actually see all the time someone will send me a script and then they'll send me a different document, that's the flowchart, and a different document, that's still the GUI. And by the end of the day, I've got this stuff spread across my desktop. I don't know where I am. I'm so lost. Whereas here on the right, I've got this nice little 10,000-foot view.
Right. And this is actually conversational.
Yep.
So
we have a real conversation.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us.
yes, thank you so much. And be sure to complete the survey and enter the raffle.